right. On behalf of the AES New York section, I'd like to welcome everybody here. And we're going to put a little panel on about practicalities of building your own studio with some great people who have got experience of doing that many times, several times in some cases. I'm going to introduce our moderator. That's Denise Barbarita. And she's going to take it from here. All right. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Rowie. So the official name is Practical Advice for Opening and Operating Your Own Commercial Studio. Something that I think all of us aspire to at some point. Some people decide to do it, some people do it, then people stop doing it. And that's all good. It's fine. This is a subject that is close to my heart, seeing as that I am a studio owner. And I had been thinking about all the different ways that, you know, the younger generation are going to have to find in order to grow their careers and grow their notoriety, I guess, if you really want to go there. But really about how do you do it? What are the stumbling blocks? What are the things that you have to do before you even think about, you know, building walls? You know, and there's a lot of stuff that I wish I had known and just kind of learned the hard way. So I'd like to introduce to you our panelists who are all amazing. So we have Frank Verderosa. Frank, would you like to tell us a little about yourself for a moment?
I press buttons and I turn knobs. No, I'm currently a post mixer at a place called Digital Arts here in New York. Prior to that, I spent 14 years at a company called Nutmeg and a whole bunch of stuff before that. I had my own studio for a decade before that. And I do a lot of sound design and mixing for TV commercials, radio commercials. I do ADR for films. I record a lot for cartoons and video games. And at night, I consult with voice actors to make sure they can work from home. COVID.
Excellent. And next we have Rich Fabrizio. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, Denise. How you doing? Thanks for having me here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
You guys are all awesome.
I'm a recording engineer and a musician, and I own and operate Frequency Recording in White Plains, New York. I've been working in my own studio for about 20 years.
Great.
Prior to that, facility assistant, as an intern, some work in the MI industry, selling musical instruments, pro audio gear, and that kind of forayed into my own business as an engineer. So I needed a place to work, so I had to build it.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Excellent. Next, we have Joe Lambert. Tell us a little bit about yourself, my friend.
Hi, Denise.
Hi.
My name is Joe Lambert. I have my own mastering company, aptly named Joe Lambert Mastering. I moved to Manhattan around 1995, start working as a recording engineer, worked at several different studios, started as a runner, worked my way up, and opened my own facility in 2007. And yeah, so this is a long time. It's getting there. Yeah.
You guys are veterans in
Yeah.
comparison. They've been open for 10 years. Seems like an eternity sometimes. So, all right, let's get down to business here. So I'll start with Frank because you have the opposite situation from the three of us, where you owned your own place and then you decided to work for a company. Give us a little insight as to your situation when you had Planet B.
Yeah.
And why you made the choice.
Well, so when I opened my own business, it was because I didn't like the way things were being done where I worked. And I just felt like I could streamline things and be more efficient and do better. So that was great for a lot of years. It got to the point where I loved the craft, hated all the paperwork, hated everything that went with it. I was trying to grow a staff. I was trying to grow the business. I had this lovely studio manager who was the sweetest person you could ever meet. But when I heard her footsteps coming toward the door, I would immediately tense up and get angry because what now? What tax thing? What insurance thing? Like what non-audio thing do I have to deal with? So I hated it. And then also, I had a financial advisor who hit me to a book called The E-Myth, which is a great read, The Entrepreneurial Myth, and it basically walks you through what it takes to be a turnkey operation. And if you are not happy being the person doing the work and running the business, then you own a job, you don't own a business. And it made me rethink everything, and I just decided I'm trying to become something that already exists all over New York City, and a place that was much bigger had an opening. So I shut it down and shifted over. Just the right thing to do at the time.
Excellent. Interesting insight. Let's also go over during COVID. If I remember correctly, you were building a home, kind of a makeshift home studio before COVID hit. And you were putting things together in your basement, right? You had a
we had
basement
renovated.
area.
It was a weird thing. We had to choose between what do we want to do? Do we want to renovate the basement or do the driveway? I said, let's do the basement. I'd had sort of a little Pro Tools rig down there, but when I was working on Gilbert's podcast, just something to work in at night. But the Thanksgiving before COVID, we had completely finished the basement, like gutted, redone it, and I had my surround set up, and I had Source Connect going, I had Zoom ready to go, and then COVID hit. Like, it was all done before we even heard of it. So my employer said, how comfortable are you working at home? And I said, 100%. Like, it's all in place. So
Advantageous, you might even add.
yeah, and it actually led to opportunities because I live in a town where there's a lot of actors, and nobody wanted to go into New York as COVID was getting scary. And to this day, there are a few pretty well-known people that come to my basement to record to save a trip to New York.
I feel like you were also the voice of lightness during COVID, I have to say, because you had opened up some Zoom calls so that all of us could call in and just kind of talk to people.
Yeah, talk to people, but also work out the tech. I did free webinars twice a week for months for actors, engineers, and talk through Source Nexus and talk through Source Connect.
That
and,
Source Nexus and Source Connect was so helpful.
Yeah, just all
Thank
the
you for that.
connectivity so we could all work and getting all the actors on the same page so they can. And that remains a side business.
That's excellent. So, Rich, we had a little bit of your intro, but I have to ask, did you start in White Plains or did you start your business elsewhere and then move to White Plains? Is there a reason why that area kind of spoke to you, or give us a little insight there?
My first studio was in Mount Vernon.
Okay.
And luckily, the studio that it built out.
Oh, great.
So that was, I moved in there, I operated 9 or 10. And I knew through that whole time that things that be better air conditioning, isolation, a cleaner space, better bath. It was a bit of like a communal rehearsal space kind of place. The studio was quite well. So I made it work for professional people don't really. So if I want to have a voice actor, maybe not the right environment for them, the job. So eventually I started to look for, what next step. Brooklyn, I thought Nashville, and at the time, this was like 12, 13 years ago. Nashville had kind of already happened, does what I'm doing. Gone down there and checked it out. And so, and Brooklyn was so oversaturated with big, small, medium size, the bunker. It's all there in Brooklyn. So,
Right.
So my home base is White Plains is the capital. And I looked around for quite a while. It took almost about 2 years right now. The ideal space to be in,
So that brings me to another question: is what were you looking for square footage wise? Like, what were the 5 non-negotiable things about the space that you finally decided on when you were looking for a space?
I mean, I knew I couldn't have anybody. I didn't want anybody that was. I didn't really want anybody to the sides either. I was really looking for commercial space. So that was in control of my own, any other spaces, my own age. still go out to find that type of space.
Mm. That
And-
also had working plumbing.
Yes, working plumbing was, and yeah, so just a lot of looking. Luckily, I had a friend that, so they were showing me a bunch of different, and yeah, the place that I finally settled on, the place that I wanted for about getting there, like, so then another few months went on, and it meets all those marks. Got nothing above me, got nothing attached. I do have a business below me. Hope we make that work. You know,
Mhm.
it doesn't really cause any problem. Where I could do the minimal necessary. I also wanted to have a large, so I knew that 400, the rest of the space was
And how large is your space altogether?
total is like, it's really, there's very little hallway. And, you know, so we've made some modifications. We turned one of the bathrooms, guitar ice, and we turned it like an electrical closet. You know, it wasn't planned. It's given me the ability to have lots of, in a pretty space.
Excellent.
And recently, about a year ago, I bought for the right spot. Is
I found that to be the hardest challenge. Joe, I'll ask the same question of you because you've had 3 moves that I know of. And now you're in your own home. So what was the motivation there? So going from Brooklyn to Jersey City, and then now I'm guessing buying a home so that you had that space at home. How did that process go?
Well, it really starts even before city in 5. The same reason most of my generation and all the generations before who wanted to work in the music entertainment industry. That's where the industry was. If you wanted to be on the, if you wanted to be on the East Coast, you came to New York City. If you wanted to, be on Broadway, if you wanted to make records, that's just where you went. So that's why I came here originally. And then over time, as I started working and building my career, my career, I started to see the whole industry shift.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just major labels fragmenting into a lot of smaller labels. Digital audio becomes a big deal and makes it much more affordable for people to start buying their own gear. And you start seeing even the major studios losing work to even major label clients. Well, we're going to record our vocals at home. So it starts fragmenting even then. So I'm working for True Tone Mastering in Midtown. This is, I guess, in the early 2000s. And it was a wonderful studio, and I really enjoyed working there. But, as I kept working there, I became pretty much like 75% of their master. And then they had made a decision to sell their space to Sony, because once Sony decided to close their huge studio, this was a building that took up a whole block in Manhattan, and they wanted to downsize to just basically a floor in Midtown. So they offered my boss a really nice buyout on his lease, and he was smart to say yeah. And so then I was forced to make a choice. And the day I found out, I called another studio, and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you. And then I went home, and I was like, I'm really, I'm the one who's bringing the work in. They're not giving me any work. Literally like 95% of my billing was because of my hustle and all the reasons that we all work.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I decided to open a studio, and I decided in Brooklyn, because from what I talked about, I saw as the music industry started to fragment, studios started to close down, they all started moving to Brooklyn, and all the kids started moving. So I opened up in Dumbo, and to me, that was the most important thing when I was starting my business. I thought what the town it was, the city it was by far the most important. I'd rather have an average studio in Brooklyn than a multi-million-dollar studio in Buffalo or some other city, because it's all about, if you're good at what you do, if you're a good engineer, you can get a makeshift room and still make a living. So I was really happy and fortunate how things worked out at Dumbo in the short term. And as I was there, Bloomberg comes into office. He changed the zoning laws.
Mm-hmm.
So there was all these empty buildings in Dumbo, and they were filled with studios and all sorts of different artists because it was illegal to renovate them into apartments. Bloomberg changed that, so I knew my time was up.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking at another place, and I assumed I was going to stay in Brooklyn. But when I was looking, I was just really anxious about the prices and how much I was going to have to invest. So, long story a little shorter, is I went over to Jersey City, which I living in Manhattan for 15 years, I never even went to Jersey City. Literally, never. So, but my friend was over there. He's like, you got to see this place. It's really blown up. So I went over there. I looked at a place right outside the PATH trains, literally 8 minutes from World Trade. And something happened that hadn't happened to me since I lived in New York, and that was that the people who owned the building wanted to help me.
Right.
And they're like, "Oh, you want us to build this place out? Yeah, we'll do it." I paid out of pocket. They built my whole studio.
Wow.
I paid out of pocket $2,500. And the only reason I had to pay is because I wanted special acoustic tiles. That's the only thing they made me pay for.
Wow.
So it was literally like $150,000 difference, because I had a lease in hand in Greenpoint. I think it's called like the Pencil Building or something
yeah,
like that.
I looked at that. Yeah.
And it was over $5,000 a month for a room with nothing. You want air conditioning? That's another $15,000. You want to paint? Everything was on top of that. And I was like, I'm going to run into the same problem. I'm going to put all this money into a building I don't own, and then they're just going to decide to renovate the building, and I'm out on my luck again. And I just was like, what am I going to do? So I was really fortunate how things worked out in Jersey City. I loved being there. It was great. And then I had the idea, I kind of always had a 5-year plan of wanting to just kind of move out of the city. 25 years was a lot to be in Manhattan. I lived in Manhattan for 25 years. And I thought, that's enough. And when you're in this business, or probably any business in New York, you're always kind of weighing your options. Like, can I live outside the city? Am I going to lose work? Is it going to be work? All that. So I went, COVID hit. I was so fortunate because I was literally, my studio was 1 block down the street from my apartment. The first floor of the building was a hospital or hospital offices. And then I was up on the 2nd floor, and nobody else was in that building for a year. So I didn't miss a single day of work because I could literally just walk to my studio. Nobody else was in the building except for 3 doctors who took my temperature every day. And, it worked out great. But it also, I didn't do an attended session for over a year. But I actually had like a 10% more billing that year. So I knew I was established enough to make the move. My wife also obviously played a part in it. She was able to work from home. and it just made sense. And it was still, really nerve-wracking to decide to leave the city. It's like a drug when you're here. You're just psychologically, you feel like, I'm doing it. I'm in New York, like.
If you can make it here.
Yeah. So when you leave, like even after 25 years, I was like, oh my God, am I just gonna fall flat on my face? And it was really nerve-wracking, but it took about a year to get used to the new place. But I'm so happy. It's great. Clients, for me, especially as a mastering, people are only work with me for a day, 2 days tops. They can't wait to get out.
I can see, yeah. That makes sense to me. I mean, I had thought about talking about COVID a little bit and how it affects us as owners and also, you being a staffer, but also from home. I found I was way busier, like all of a sudden everybody had projects to do because they were going stir crazy at home, recording at home and realizing they can't mix it at home, or they could, but why? You know what I mean? So we were incredibly busy in 2020, and the situation for me was, my husband was nice enough to drive me back and forth to the studio. So I was kind of lucky in that regard. But I also, set up a home rig so that I could do editing, at home, so I didn't have to go anywhere. But yeah, that's a very interesting point. I would also think that a build out at home as a mastering engineer is a much different bird than as a tracking engineer. Like maybe post-production or mastering would be more feasible to be able to find a home that had that right amount of size. Like you don't need a full tracking room. You don't have to do all of that. And you don't have to worry about people traveling, outside of a day.
Or staying.
Right.
That's the part you got to work on.
So that makes a lot of sense. I have to ask though, so in Jersey and in White Plains area, did you guys have, did you see anything about the usable square feet versus rentable square feet? Do you know what I'm talking about?
That's actually a term in commercial real estate I've really never dealt with. I've never,
I think it's just a city thing.
It must be a New York City thing. Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like, the square footage is the total square footage of the space. The owner of the building doesn't really care, what you do inside those walls.
Right.
You're paying for every square foot,
So here in New York City, they have what's called usable square feet and rentable square feet. Usable square feet is the actual size of the space. Rentable square feet is what you're paying for. So this room, what would you say, is like 20 by 20 or so, 25 by 25-ish, you think? Yeah. So roughly, what is that, 500-ish? So this room would be called usable square feet, 500 square feet, but rentable might be up to 7 because of the hallway, the shared hallways, things of that sort. They'll measure straight out, which is
The elevator, the sidewalk in
elevators,
front of
ugh.
the building when I was
I mean,
looking.
in New York City, I have to say it's shameful, just shameful. I walked into rooms that they called 700 square feet because that was my number. That's what I wanted. You walk in there and you're like, it's 30 by 10. No, with the drop ceiling to add to that. With, most people wanted at least 3 months of security deposit plus your first and your last. So that's a huge sum, the rental prices for different spaces in the city, my Lord, even just in Long Island City where I am, it could be $43 a square foot. It could be $29 a square foot. It could be $175 a square foot, blocks away from each other with no rhyme or reason. But it was insanity. So you didn't have any of those issues in the White Plains area? Maybe just a city thing?
Yeah, I've never dealt with any issues with, the actual square footage. I mean, I think sometimes you kind of question it. Like, is that actually 1,500 square feet? I don't know. And then
That's why you get those laser,
and then you have to actually
rulers.
Actually have to measure. Yeah, I feel like the amount of space I have is 1,300 square feet. I think I'm ready for at least 2,000 square feet. So I feel
Okay.
a little contained. I need a little more space.
All right.
So
And-
I was
and
thinking
Joe,
about
did-
possibly building out onto the roof. There's a roof that I could
Oh.
build out onto. recently the building was purchased by a new owner about a year ago, and I think after he purchased it, that's not. With the previous owner, it was
wow.
definitely a
I
possibility.
mean, why not just buy the building?
That was actually offered to me, but
No. No. So, did you find that the usable square feet, rentable square feet situation in Jersey City and Brooklyn? Brooklyn, most likely.
Brooklyn for sure, because once you get outside of Manhattan, it's just a different world. So the rest of the country, they're much more aggressive at trying to get your work. Where in Brooklyn or Manhattan, it's like, when you go to rent an apartment, there's a line of people waiting.
Right.
So they're like, well, yeah, look, they don't really have to work, and they just like, yeah, if you don't want it, the next person's going to. So
Right.
when you get outside the city, they don't have that luxury. So they actually have to do their job and sell you, give you a reason to give them a long-term lease.
I mean, that Jersey City lease. It's pretty sweet. I
It
think
was
of your whole
really
build
sweet.
out.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
How nice is that? All right, so let's also talk about a few other things that you have to consider before you start building walls, which is insurance, lawyers to go over the lease, those types of things. Did any of you, I know Frank, your situation was different because you were kind of subleasing from
Yes.
Campo and it was all kind of taken care of, but did you actually have to do any build out in that space to?
I did
Or-
my own stuff. I had worked for the company, quit, went to work for a massive company, didn't like it, came back to Campo and said, I want to flip it. I'm going to pay you instead of you paying me. I put in my own phone lines. I hired my own people and grew within the walls. But the thing for the post world insurance, some ad agencies won't work with you unless you list them on your E&O insurance. And that's expensive. But once you show them that they're listed on your insurance, then they work with you and you make it back. But Arizona Emissions Insurance.
So
hurdle.
did Campo Studios, yes, studios, I worked there, that's why it seems so familiar. Did they require you to carry your own insurance?
No, it was a very loose sort of arrangement. And I just paid them based on what I made.
Mm.
And then grew to the point where after a number of years, before 9/11, because I was already looking at real estate in the city because my accountant at the time said, what you're paying them monthly, you can have a space anywhere in New York to call your own. So that's when I started looking around, but it was kind of a nightmare. The only benefit back then was the dot-com bubble had burst, so there were gorgeous spaces all over the city, hardwood floors and Ethernet wired throughout and cool lighting from whatever dot-com had just gone under, but nothing really worked. I ended up sharing a place with with a jingle company. They had a perfect amount of space we sat on the floor. Until I just didn't like it anymore. When you're no longer enjoying going to work, it's time to figure out what.
Understood. When it came to your leases, Joe and Rich, I'll let you expand on it. Obviously you need a lawyer to look over the details. Were there specific things that surprised you in some commercial leases that you had, or?
the thing that surprised me was I negotiated with my previous landlord, and he wanted a 10% bump after 5 years. And I was like, if I've been a good tenant for 5 years, you should want to keep me as a tenant. Why do you want to, dig into my pocket like that so deep? I've been here for 5. So luckily I negotiated for that not to happen.
Excellent.
Just kind of have a standard 3% increase yearly, which is kind of standard. Westchester.
Joe?
The biggest issue when I was in Dumbo is they had a clause that allowed them to negate the lease if they sold the building.
We had
You had
that
a
too.
You had a 6-month window. I don't know what my father thought that was a really dumb. He's like, why would you? First off, because my dad is so old school and he had his own business, and he was like, why would you put a business in a building you don't own? This is stupid. Dad, I can't buy a building in Brooklyn. Like, I don't think you understand. It's not, this isn't Batavia, New York. So that was a big thing, but I still, I went ahead. And then as Rich said, they put these, and this is again another New York thing where even if you have a long-term lease, they're still putting you up for 3 or 4% every single year, which in most cities they don't do that.
Right.
Like that's kind of the whole point of having a long-term lease is that you're locked. So I had to negotiate that down too, and I had to negotiate that down in Jersey City as well.
Yeah.
To like, I think I got it 1.5 or 2%,
Yeah, we hired a lawyer to get rid of that clause.
and it worked.
It did.
All right.
It did. We actually got it set up so that if the building got sold at any point, whatever the length of our lease was, is what we wouldn't be responsible for it. And that we'd have to get paid that amount. We had a good lawyer. There was also the good guy clause. You guys familiar with the good guy clause? Basically, if you sign this document, the good guy clause, it means that if you have to leave at any point for any reason, they're not going to hold you to the remainder of your lease. So that was also something that we negotiated for, which I'm glad we did. In terms of insurance, like our building made it mandatory to have a $3 million liability coverage. Plus we had our equipment, our equipment insurance. Did you have the same type of thing? Does your building require you to have a certain amount of liability insurance? Obviously at home. Actually, at home is the question I'd like to ask, is that do you have a separate insurance plan specifically for your business and your home?
I keep them separate.
Okay.
I was wondering why I did that. I was trying to remember why I did that. I think I did it just simply because I already had it set up and it was just easier. And I may want to revisit that and see if it works out better financially for me. But I do like having them separate. I like having, separate church and state there.
But I mean, even for, these days with climate change and everything, do you need a separate like flood insurance for the studio and for home?
No, the flood insurance.
Would your home insurance cover the
Yes.
studio if anything happened?
Yes, because it's the same physical problem.
Okay. Well, that's
But
good
the
to know.
gear and everything internally is separate on the company.
Okay. Rich?
The same kind of thing. I don't know. I think the landlord required like a $2 million liability insurance. It's not that much on a yearly basis. And it just basically covers slip and fall, like if somebody falls down the stairs or something like that. And then I have a policy for my equipment that's very expensive.
And who are you with?
Clarion.
Okay.
So it's very expensive in my opinion. And I do have sprinklers throughout the whole space. So I mean, worst case scenario is if that's when those sprinklers goes off, I mean, I got a wet control room. So,
Right.
I mean, it's going to be a disaster if anything like that happens. But
So you have two separate policies
The-
with two
the-
separate companies or
two
one company?
two separate companies, yeah.
Okay. And Joe, you?
Two separate companies.
And are you, who's your equipment insured by?
I'd have to ask Diana. I can't remember. I don't remember the name.
And Frank, did you also have to have liability insurance at all with your spaces? If you remember?
No, we didn't have anything. I mean, we
And-
were kind of under Campo when we were there. And now on my own, I don't really know. I mean, we have our home insurance. Most of the stuff I bought with my money. And I work full-time for another studio. And I have to say these days, too, I'm back in person much more often. I'm in the city a lot more, sort of flipping it from where we were during COVID, where I was just home and didn't want to go in, and now it's, a lot more. Last week I was in person for sessions 4 days out of the 5.
Wow.
This week, not so much, but it varies.
So, I'm gonna skip that. Do you find that now, how am I gonna rephrase this? I'm taking a look at two different questions. I had one for Tim, and now I don't have it anymore. So, do you find that after COVID, like the before and after, Are you seeing a big difference in terms of your workload, or is it basically the same?
I'm definitely busier now than during the pandemic with different types of jobs. For band recordings, like recording a band was not really happening during 2021.
Obviously.
Yeah. So
But
I
I'm
mean,
saying before COVID, like, how do you feel like you've leveled out, or is it better now?
I think I have fewer clients doing longer sessions.
Okay.
So I think that's good. You know,
Keeps it
longer,
consistent.
more long-term serious projects and less kind of short bookings.
Okay.
You know.
And Joe, how about you?
It's pretty similar. I think the biggest difference for me, and it simply might be that I'm at home now, or in Westchester, is I used to get a lot of one song attendance, which frankly were, they're a pain because it takes a lot of time. You're waiting for people and such. So that doesn't happen as much. That happens like, once a week as opposed to every day, or someone would just come in, I got one song I want to do. But other than that, it's pretty similar.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. COVID was really busy for me, like busier than before COVID. But there was also a shift in what we were doing. Pre-COVID, we'd have clients like that would book a room for 5 hours just so I could have an actor in the booth and send them to LA and babysit. And we had a lot of those. And as an engineer would tell you, that is not what you want to be doing. I mean, it's lucrative, but it wasn't fun. Then we shifted because actors were no longer coming in. There was some kind of global pandemic. But we were mixing a lot more. So I found that I was doing a lot more sound design, mixing, the stuff that I enjoy doing more. And now coming out of COVID, it's a hybrid. I might come in, tomorrow I'm coming in for a commercial record, not a lot going on. Next week I have a video game thing. And then I might have a radio production where I might do it all remote. So it ebbs and flows, but I would say company-wide during COVID was pretty crazy. And I think because I nailed down the remote workflow really fast, clients were, and I would do free events for the clients. Let me show you how we can work remotely. I had a client, TMI, but they pulled an account of mine in-house during the pandemic. And a week later, they reached back out to me with a job. And I knew the voice actor that I had cast as the role of the brand. And I said, what happened? She said, well, their in-house guy couldn't figure out how to record 2 people at once remotely. So they would record, keep me waiting an hour while they recorded the next person, wait an hour while they're editing, and it was like an 8-hour day to do a 30-second spot, whereas I will do that in 3 hours. So there was that aspect of it. And now we're on the other side of it, and it's a mixed bag. And digital arts is more than just audio. Like we have a movie theater where we are booked all day, every day on screenings for the networks. We have mixes that happen in there. We have color corrector who's always busy. We have editors. We have 4-wall space, virtual and physical, for movie companies. So there's a lot going on in the floors of digital arts outside of me just mixing commercials. So knock wood, we stay busy.
Excellent.
It's a cool space.
Um,
Come visit.
Actually, I had a question about digital arts and specifically. Is it where you were all under an umbrella, where you have somebody who's actually booking the clients, or do they expect you to have your own client base when you walk in the door?
Well, we're a weird situation because digital arts has been there for a while. But when Nutmeg closed, I think there was a time where the owner of digital arts was trying to acquire Nutmeg, and that wasn't working. But when they closed, we all just moved over. So
I
it
see.
was, all the remaining mixers, color corrector, producers, editors, schedules, and we brought all the business with us. So that was that.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Have studio. You have the clients, come on
Yeah,
in.
come on in.
We've got the infrastructure, you have the clients.
Yeah.
Win-win.
Perfect.
So another question would be, in terms of financing, there are a bunch of different options. So if you don't have all the money that you need at first, There are lots of different options that you can look into. There are SBA loans, there's a business line of credit, there's business term loans, unsecured loans, things of that sort. Did you, when you first started out, I'm just curious, did you have an equipment loan at all? Did you need to have any kind of financial help or pay off anything to get your original gear? You know, how did that work for Open Floor?
When I started Planet V, we were working out of what Campo already had. But while we were there, I was investing, shifting from SSL Screen Sound, which was that 8-track audio
Oh, I
system.
remember it well.
Yeah, and I loved it. I was really fast on it. It was great. But then, you know, the Mac-based stuff started to grow. So I actually ran my business for years on Motu Digital Performer, which I still miss in many ways, but that's another whole story. And then, but I never really, I just keep investing my own money back into it. At one point after 9/11, we qualified for an SBA loan to kind of sustain the business, and we took that opportunity to buy a lot of things, and then we moved. We moved up to 21st Street. And against the advice of everybody I know, when I decided to sell the business and move on, it was a 10-year loan with 2 years of no payment.
Oh.
And 0% interest, and I felt obligated to pay it back. So I sold everything, and my accountant, everybody I knew was like, it's an SBA loan. They're expecting you to lose money. It's a 9/11 thing. I'm like, yeah, but I mean, like, I'm selling all this stuff, and that money. So I foolishly sold everything and paid off that complete loan, took the high road, but I'm probably one of the only people that did that. But that was the only money I ever got outside of my own.
Okay.
This is interesting stuff. Yeah, you need a lot of money to build a studio, so it's got to come from somewhere. When I was like 12 or 13 years old, I told my parents they should invest in a small company. It was called Apple, and it did pretty well. So
You think?
yeah. So honestly, without that Apple stock, I wouldn't have had the initial bit of cash to build
Isn't
my
that
current
interesting?
studio in White
That's
Plains.
fascinating. That's
And it
excellent.
took me and convincing my parents to allow me to just sell it all
Wow.
to start as that was the impetus for it all. So with that money from Apple, I was able to build the studio in White Plains plus some other cash that I had. And I pretty much did it. And at the end of the build at my current studio, I owed the contractor $30,000 in extras. So that was basically, you know, the first 9 months of business was just paying back the contractor.
Gotcha.
So money's got to come from somewhere. Yeah, you know, you can go to your bank and try to get a loan, but when you start talking about the music industry, recording studios, they are not looking to give you know, a $40,000 loan to open a commercial recording studio. It's going to be very difficult. More difficult in 2023 than in 2012 or than I was, you know, looking to do this. But the SBA is a great resource too, and I've just recently
It just takes forever.
yeah, I've recently learned about them. I did get a bit of a loan from the SBA after the pandemic, and I think in the future I would go to them and you know, because I'm looking to do like a gear upgrade, and I think that might be a good place to get it from, because they have low
Super
interest
low
loans.
interest rates.
Yeah.
It just takes forever. Although the idle loans were very helpful during the pandemic because we also needed to upgrade some equipment, and I thought, well, they're offering it. It's 3% interest
Yeah.
or 2.75, 3.75, something crazy, and I'm like, yeah, we need that new Mac. Let's do that.
So I will say I go into my bank, a TD bank, and I go in every once in a while and be depositing money, and I let them know, I'm like, you're the guys that didn't want to give me a loan to open my business. Here you go. Here's my $1,000 deposit. Have a nice day.
Yeah, that feels good.
Yeah, it does.
Joe?
When I first opened in JLM in Dumbo, I took out a small business loan. I remember it being a little difficult. I had to jump through some hoops. I'm not really, I guess for the same reason, they're not really in a big hurry. I had some credit. I had, from when I was a kid, I worked, my father had his own car dealership. So since 8th grade, I was working for my father, you know, either part-time or full-time in the summer. So he instilled in me, like, okay, you know, set up a bank account. So here's how you work things. So I had a small amount of credit built up. And there was a weird loan though that it took for some reason. I didn't notice at first. It took me a couple of months to notice that there was no interest being paid on the first couple payments. So I had to look into it, and they're like, well, yeah, you have to make extra payments for the interest.
Ew.
So if I didn't catch that, I would have, it would have taken me forever to pay it off. But luckily we caught that, and it was probably Diana who caught that. Diana Zinni's my manager. She's been my manager for about 10 years. So yeah, I took that out. And then when I built the studio in my home, I could have frankly used my own money, but I have the credit built up. I didn't need too much money, relatively. So I took out another, no, actually I just have a line of credit. I just have a line of credit for my company, and the interest rate is really low. So I used that, and I paid it off in like 6 months. I just kind of used it just to use it as, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to be wrapping up soon and getting into Q&A from our audience members and or from Facebook. Do we have any questions from Facebook? Okay. How about the budget busters that inevitably happens? For me, it was these little decouplers that you put between the existing wall and your new wall that were all $29 each, and we needed 230 of them. And I went, what? I'm glad we have them. The other one was we had to redo some of the electricity lines in our space to make it work for us. And that was another, I think, $7,500 or something crazy, which also was not in my budget when we moved. So were there any budget busters in your experience when you were building your rooms that just caught you by surprise?
Well, in my first studio, I made one big mistake, and that was the HVAC system. I allowed the guy to talk me out of having a ductless system,
Okay.
and he put in a regular system with the big, not tubing, but
I know what you mean. The
big
venting system.
silver
Flex
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, and it totally messed my room up. So it was in there for one day. I'm like, I can't work like this. So I had to pull that out, get another system, and that was like basically 12 grand down the toilet. So I did learn from that. The second studio, I didn't really have. There were mistakes made by the designers. It didn't cost me more financially, but it cost me a lot more time because they mismeasured the ceiling. I have a floating floor put in, and it's a 4-inch floating floor, and they didn't include that in the height. So when the the builders come in and he's showing me, he's like, "This ceiling, Joe, you're going to be at like 7'8" or whatever." Like I'm like, that's not right. So that 4 inches changed my whole ceiling. Like we were gonna do these specific panels. I had to nix that idea, put in a hard, a whole different setup, but get different panels. So it took a lot longer. Yeah, anytime you buy a house, anything, you're gonna run into trouble. You're gonna spend 5-10% more than you thought. It's just almost inevitable. And if you're in the city, well, then it's even worse.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, the thing that really got me was the fire sprinklers. The designer came in and designed the studio and the layout, and he even mentioned something to me about the sprinklers. She's like, they have sprinklers in here. There's a lot of them. They're going to have to change those. And I was like, how much is that going to cost? And he gave me a figure. That figure was nowhere close to what it cost.
Surprise.
And there's a sprinkler head going up the stairs to the entrance of the studio. So if you're carrying your guitar bag or your bass, there's a possibility you can tap that sprinkler head. So I know a lot about sprinklers now. after building my
bet.
studio.
I
I
bet.
know that I want to build a studio in a building that has no sprinklers because that would make it much easier. But
Wouldn't that be a fire hazard?
I mean, there's buildings that don't have sprinklers, you know, and it's okay, you know, things don't burn down. But yeah, that caught me.
Really?
Not in my house.
Yeah, home studio doesn't have sprinklers, you know, depending on where you are. But it's like, you know, where I was, like, if there's sprinklers in the building and you build out, you have to keep the same amount of sprinklers or add more. You can't have less.
Yeah, we couldn't cover ours completely. They
Yeah.
had to still be accessible.
Exactly.
So in our control room, we were like, screw the ceiling. I don't want to deal with that. But for the live room, the way that I designed the space is our live room is completely decoupled and separated on its own, but we could only do 7.5 to 9 foot ceilings. So the ceiling is sloped, but we had to have access to all of the sprinklers.
Yeah.
But, you know, that gets expensive. So our control room does not have that.
I think the sprinkler modifications was something like, it was about $400 a head or something like that.
Wow, that's a lot.
You know, so if you've got 20 heads, you know, it's thousands of dollars in you know, sprinkler work. And someday I'll be turning that space over to somebody else with all those sprinklers I paid for, you know. So that's one thing that kind of,
Well, that was very generous of you.
it was very generous of me.
To think about the next generation.
Yes.
It's a giver.
You just
Yeah.
work that into the sale price.
Yeah.
So when it comes to contractors, did you already have someone in mind when you, I mean, Frank, your place was already, was already pretty much built. Did you guys have specific contractors in mind? If you didn't, how did you find the people that you wound up working with? And bonus question, did you give the contractor, like, this is what I want? Tell me what can be done and what can't be done, and how much is it going to cost me? Did you go over materials with them? Did you look at other design options that they might have brought into the equation? How did that work for you two?
Well, for me, I literally, the first studio, I literally drew out on a yellow sheet of paper while I was sitting in the room in Dumbo, measuring things out. And I handed those to one of my friends who's a designer, designs buildings in New York. And I was like, this is what I want. Can you make this work, you know, and translate this into the proper schematics or whatever you want to call it that, you know, a contractor's going to need. So he did that. Second space, kind of did the same thing. And in the space in my home, again, I sat down, measured it out, knew what I wanted. You know, I'd learned a little bit. And then I hired Crossley Acoustics. They came down, and the professionals came in, and, you know, we discussed it. I told them what I wanted. They told me what would work best. We had a little back and forth. And then they brought in contractors who did the physical work.
Okay.
I have an interesting story to share about this. So I found the space, and then I needed to find a designer. So I got on the phone, started talking to some people, and the person I really wanted to do the design was Francis Manzella, who's no longer with us. And he gave me a number that was like the best piece of advice for building a studio. He's like, all right, how big is the space? How much money do you have? Like within the first minute of our phone call, I told him how big the space was. I told him how much money I had to start with. He goes, okay, it's going to cost $1,000 per square foot to build your studio. So that number, after I built out, I realized he was absolutely right, because the things that we didn't do, I would have gotten there at that price.
Right.
So if I had gotten to that $1,000 per square feet, so like the $130,000 build out, I would have had all those things that I feel like I miss. I reached out to some people that I knew that had studios, and Maddie Amendola turned me on to this guy named Chris Harmody, and Chris Harmody had just built Jungle City Studios. So I was like, Jungle City, that's I love everything there. And so the guy who actually put hammer to nail at Jungle City and put Louis Vuitton wallpaper in Alicia Keys' office, he was the designer for my build.
Wow.
So he came there, you know, I told him what I wanted. I told him I wanted a larger control room, smaller tracking space. He tried to talk me out of it, and he said you should do the opposite. You should have a smaller tracking room. I'm sorry, a larger tracking room and a smaller control room. Now in 2023, I think I kind of probably should have gone that way, but I like the way it worked out. You know, I get 6 people in the control room. We got a bunch of keyboards in there, lots of gear. I can have the gear, you know, far away from the walls. So it's worked out to have the large control room.
Good.
As far as the person who put hammer to nail in my space, that was a challenge to find the right contractor who could actually take this design and build a proper recording studio that has a lot of specialty kind of elements to the build. The biggest specialty element would be the fact that you really want to decouple the drywall or any type of walls from existing, you know, walls and ceilings.
And those little decouplers are about $29 a piece.
Yeah, and not just the actual mechanism, but the actual, like when they actually hang the drywall on the studs, you don't really want it to touch the floor. You don't want it really to touch the ceiling. You want it to be like fully decoupled. So
Green glue.
there's a lot of green glue. Yeah, a lot of green glue.
Lots of green glue.
But I guess, yeah, I mean, long story short, you have to find a good designer who takes your vision and lays it out in the proper way. I think that that's probably easier to find than to find a proper contractor who's built a commercial recording studio that you could afford.
Right.
I ended up with a team of guys. They did a great job, but they took a long time. And that whole time I was paying rent. So I learned, I keep saying, I always say I learned a lot doing this studio build. This was the first one. The next one, with all the stuff I learned, it's going to go quicker. It's probably going to cost a lot more, but it's definitely going to be quicker. It's going to be more efficient. And you really do have to be a foreman on your own job. You know, which I kind of let these guys, you know, build the place. They're leaving at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Everything's cool. Showing up early, but you're leaving at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, there's no reason you can't stay till 6 o'clock at night. You know, you still have some energy in you. So you have to push these types of workers to really, you know, make it happen quick because time is money.
Yeah, in my situation, I still had my studio on the Upper West Side open. So I was working there. My husband was on tour. And I was like going back and forth from the upper West Side to Long Island City and getting there. Like I tried to book all of my sessions in such a way that I could get to the studio on Long Island City while it was being built by like 3 o'clock because I knew they were leaving somewhere between 4 and 5. Man, the one thing that almost made me tear my hair out was I had it built a certain way. I'd measured it out, like by the millimeter, you know. I walk in and I see these lines on the floor, and I'm like, this is supposed to be 6.5 feet. Why is it only 5? The contractor says, well, I figured you want a little bit more space in your live room rather than in the lounge, you know. So I thought maybe that was a mistake because you didn't account for the wall width. And I'm like, oh no, I accounted for the wall width. I want 6.5 feet in this section that goes to 9. Oh, okay, yeah, we can fix that. We can fix that.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
The incompetence that you deal with, it's incredible.
Yeah, I wouldn't say
You
it
gotta
wasn't.
be there every day.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was incompetence. He actually thought he was doing me a favor, but, you know, I had to
the
put
fact
my
that he
foot down on
didn't
that.
call you?
He didn't call me. Oh, second one. Second issue was I wanted one of the ductless system. I wanted one over by me in the front of the control room because I'm always hot. And I wanted the air to be blowing on me and not the client. Meanwhile, the one that's in the live room is on the other side of these glass doors. So what does he do? When the air conditioning people came in, they put them side by side because it was more efficient. And they had already started drywalling by the time I got in. I'm like, this is supposed to be over here, you know? And he's like, yeah, it's just that it's more efficient. So if anything happens in the long run, you know, they'll all be here and it's easier and the ducts and blah, blah, blah. I'm still mad because every summer I'm in the front like, you know, meanwhile, because it's 10 degrees warmer on my side than it is on the client side. They're all complaining they're cold. And I'm just like, I wear a sweater. You know what I mean? Like, I don't mean to be mean The mistake I made in my own design was, again, we had to make sure that our ceilings were below the sprinklers, and I wanted a sloped ceiling. So from my side of the control room, so it'd be control room, live room, lounge, it's 7.5 feet to 9 feet. So what I didn't realize after the room was built, we shut both of the doors, and I was speaking with a few friends of mine in the control room. My assistant was out in the lounge, and he comes in and he goes, Denise, we have a problem. I'm like, what's that? I can hear every word you say, because it worked as a horn above the ceiling. So that was my mistake. I admit it, totally my mistake. So we had to wall it off on the control room side, which helped mitigate that problem. But yeah, we all make a couple little mistakes. Sure. I will know not to do that again. All right. So the last question before we open it up to Q&A is, do you have any specific advice for those freelancers or assistants right now who are looking to start their own business? Is there something that you wish you had known before you started this journey?
Yeah. I wanted to piggyback on what we were just talking about. For anyone that's a young engineer, college student, or working and considering one day having your own project studio, all of this sounds very daunting. And I'm going to tell a story that I think I told on the Zoom, but when I was in SUNY Fredonia, we had an AES meeting, and an acoustician named Francis Daniel, I believe that's his name, came up. Older gentleman, did a lot of New York studios, and talked about building the perfect studio. Acoustic decoupling, having the air dropped in, not blown in, all the things that make a perfect studio. Having the speakers built on stands that go to earth and it's not connected to the room, all this really cool stuff. And he talked for about an hour on all that. And at the very end he said, but the biggest records in the country were made in basement studios in Queens on Yamaha NS10Ms, all the hip hop that was coming out back then. And none of that applied to them. And I will even say now, like my home studio, my personal project studio, is none of what you guys have put into yours. And I've got a really simple, I mean, you know, at Digital Arts we have 5.1 Genelecs, we have a, you know, Atmos room, which is Genelec front end, and then we have Myers all around. Our theater is all Myers. Really good setup, and I think we just got, what are they, PMC speakers in our Studio A, gorgeous. But at home, I've got a really kind of, not low end, but affordable JBL 5.1 system with a sub, and I'm mixing short films and commercials, and I've gone to see my films in theaters with my relatively untreated space, and it translates beautifully. And anything I mix at home that I bring to the studio and throw it up on our systems there, it translates beautifully. So we're in this time now where the barrier to entry to have a project studio is pretty low. You know, monthly costs of Pro Tools notwithstanding, the hardware is cheaper than ever. If the things existed now that we have, you know, to get ourselves running, if I had that back around 9/11, it would have been a whole different deal for me, because I was at a point where I needed to buy digibeta decks and D2 machines and all this really expensive stuff, and now none of that matters. We're shuttling QuickTimes and MP3s to the clients and deliverables. And you know, we have really high-end stuff at the studio, but at home, I'm using a Scarlett 18i20 to drive a 5.1 room and Zoom and Source Connect and all that stuff, because I'm not really doing a lot of recording at home. So if that existed when I had my facility, you could run a radio room on that and bill pretty good money. So there's a lot you can do, but there's also a lot you can do for very affordable to get the ball rolling at home. And now we have this new world of headphone mixing in the simulated environments and all that, which I've not played around with a lot, but I know Atmos mixers who are working in binaural in their headphones and doing fine with that. So there's what you can do, and there's what you can do to get started. It doesn't have to freak you out about all the, you know, grow to that, grow to what these guys have done, you know, but you can start pretty small.
Would you like to expand on that?
What was the question?
Oh.
Say it again.
What day is it?
Thursday.
Are there things that you wish that you would have known, that you had known Like that, what you don't know
Regarding
what you
the
don't
business
know.
or the having a
Regarding
studio?
regarding really building a studio and starting a business on your own, are there things that you wish you had known when you started, or do you think you just kind of learn it as you go?
I, well, not talking about building a studio, like, I mean, you have a manager, Joe has a manager, right? I run my business myself, I don't have a secretary.
Same.
It would be more valuable to me to have a secretary, somebody answering the phone, than to have somebody setting up a microphone for me.
Same.
So because of the economics of all of this, I would consider my business like a micro business. So when you go talk to a bank and I show them like my ledger, it's like, yeah, this is a micro business. You know, it's like I can't afford to have employees. So if you're in that type of industry and, you know, I make a decent living, I'm able to have a home, I drive a car, you know, but it's like I can't afford to have employees to help the business go further, you know. So that's something that, you know, maybe 10 years ago, that if I knew that, I might have considered doing something a little differently. You know, maybe having, you know, invested more, you know, but you want to be safe too. You want to keep things safe, you know, so you don't go over the edge. But yeah, I mean, now kind of like you were saying, you don't like dealing with the paperwork and everything. It's like I do a lot of paperwork. You know, I'm the bookkeeper. I'm the biller. I'm the cool guy. You know, I'm the artist. I do everything. You know.
And
Yeah,
doesn't
you're-
it also impact your ability to get away, right? Like one of the hurdles I had, we talked about this on our Zoom, was you groom a junior to kind of fill your shoes so you can do other things,
Yeah.
but the clients are there for you.
Exactly.
So I found that every time I got in my car to start driving somewhere, the phone would ring and there'd be some kind of fire I needed to put out from afar. And the flip side, again, getting back to technology, my next computer is going to be a MacBook, so I can take my whole thing with me and a pair of headphones. And if a client has an emergency, put on the headphones, fire it up, spit out the mix. You know, that's my world. But yeah, I know that what you're saying is why I had to close mine. The whole idea of couldn't really afford a big staff, but needed to get to the next level, and that's when I was like, can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, the cost of operating a studio, I mean, if I knew what the costs were 10 or 15, I wouldn't believe the amount that I put into my business. You know, it's pretty crazy. But at the same time, it's a micro business. So if you compare like what I do to like somebody that runs a successful restaurant, I mean, the numbers are totally different. You know,
It's a totally different business.
totally different. You know,
Yeah.
it's like a totally different thing. So, but you know,
There's only so much you can listen to in one day without going stir crazy, I think.
a little of that too. Yeah, you can only, you know, take 12 hours of sessions or 15 hours of sessions a day, you know, but
And then do all the paperwork.
yeah.
And then pack up the studio.
yeah.
Yeah.
We usually save the paperwork for the weekends, but try to stay on top of it.
Mine is Sunday. Sunday is my day.
Yes.
Joe?
As far as what, you know, if I opened a studio in 1995, I would have had to do things very differently than I do now. So I think if you're someone who's thinking of building a studio now or opening a studio, to piggyback on what they've said is, yeah, don't get in over your head. Get started. See where your career goes. See what kind of clients you have. See what kind of questions you're asked, and what is asked of you will determine what you need. Do you need to be working with video? Are you going to be recording live stuff? You know, we do different things. You know, it's all cross-pollinated, but eventually you're going to likely start to find your career going in one direction or another. Maybe you're getting asked to mix a lot. Maybe you're getting asked to record podcasts a lot. These things are going to help you make decisions on which direction to go, and then you'll have hopefully a few clients lined up. You'll have some experience that's telling you, you know, this is worth investing in, as opposed to just opening a studio and spending all this money and being, okay, you know, I have a studio now, I'm an engineer. It's like, well, you know, it's not really how it works today. There are very few places left that you could go to out of school and get an quote-unquote internship and, work your way up through their system, So if you find that situation, great, and see what happens. But if you're going to just start off, in your garage, in your house, or in a small space, just keep it simple. Keep your stress level low. Take some business classes. I can't stress that enough. Because you have to know how to do the accounting. You have to know how to collect the money. You have to know how to pay your bills, or it doesn't matter how good you are, because you will be shut down. You will be out of business.
Good
I feel
point.
like every school, like I took a music business course up in Fredonia, but it was all about the history of the musicians union and all this stuff. And like what it should have been was invoicing and accounts receivable and dealing with that. Cause that was, I'm a miser. I loved at the end of the day going over, what did I build today? My wife would call me at 11 o'clock at night, like, are you coming home? Like, couple more invoices, until that got to be no fun. But I had to learn all that. And I wish I learned it in college, because that's a really important part of what we do,
Yeah, it's a business.
And we all need a cousin named Guido in Brooklyn who can break some knees. Every once in a while, it's kind of helpful to have that guy.
Or at least imply it.
Imply it. We don't really talk to him for a reason.
Although again, getting back to like accessibility and tech, like we live in a world of Venmo and PayPal.
Thank God.
So like my evening appointments that I do, people can book me via my website, and they don't get the Zoom link till they pay Venmo or PayPal. So it's like a whole different world compared to when I owned my shop. Those things didn't exist.
Right.
So
Yes. There was a question that was on the tip of my tongue, and now I've lost it. That makes me sad.
it'll come back to you, but
It'll
not
come
tonight.
back to me around midnight. I think that's pretty much all the questions that I have, except for this one that just disappeared in my brain.
One of these guys will ask a question,
Yeah,
and it'll
and
come
then
back
it'll
to you.
and then it'll come back to me. Does anybody have any specific questions? Yes.
Yeah, let's give them
Oh, the.
It's gotta be turned on.
Thank you. Is it a button?
Much better.
There
Hey,
it goes.
cool.
Yeah, really appreciate the time just for everyone to stop by here and kind of tell your stories of how you started out. I'm kind of in that phase where I'm nowhere close to opening up a studio, but I'm kind of sifting through that work and building a client base. And I was just wondering, kind of off of what Joe was saying, where you kind of let the work dictate what you want to do. But I also have this other pull where it's like I'm really into mastering, but there's such a narrow funnel for it, and it's hard to find work for it. And it's, a lot of times it's like, okay, I can mix again or do this again, but I'm wondering, how you navigate those kind of pushes and pulls of building a client base. That could start off as a question, I guess.
Well, I think, when you get started, I assumed when I got started, well, first I thought I was going to be a rock star, and that didn't happen.
It still might happen.
We lost our record deal. I decided to become an engineer, went back to school.
It's never too
And
late, Joe.
When I went, my band is awesome. I'll send you a video. When I went back to school, I was like, I want to be a producer, because I was always the guy in my band who basically did all the heavy lifting. As I moved to New York, started doing things, I started thinking, well, all the producers I know, like, for me to get to that level, for me to get to where I want to be, I'm probably going to be like in my mid-40s before I even get anywhere near that. So I started thinking, okay, I gotta be more open-minded. And I took I was mixing, I was recording, I was doing live sound. I would do anything I could do to keep the doors open to me, opportunity-wise. You still, if you want to focus, you remind yourself what you want to do, and you can try to steer yourself in a direction. But at the same time, the things that are popular now, 5 years from now, there may be an opportunity that you never thought about, that it could be a really big opportunity. And so I would suggest, with that in mind, if you really do want to get into mastering, it is so specific, and it sounds cliche, but it's such a specific thing to do that it's really difficult to do if you haven't mixed just hundreds of songs. And even when it's like, then there's still a road to turn. So yeah, I was fortunate to work under, I was mentored. I worked at a place called Classic Sound. I worked for a mastering engineer named Scott Hall, who had just finished working with Bob Ludwig for like 10 years. And if you don't know who Bob is, he's like, he just retired. He's basically the standard of mastering. He really is the person, one of the very few who really kind of created what mastering is. So I would strongly suggest, if that is the direction you want to go, to work with someone who is established, if you can. But yeah, just keep your options open. Do anything, anything you can. Because you may be, I have friends who are like, yeah, I wanted to do this, but this guy's paying me all this money to do this. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth.
Solid.
I have nothing to add to that.
I could add something
But,
to that.
but as you're mentioning, I'm sorry, as you're mentioning names, I'm flashing back to the old master disc space, which I think True Tone took over at some point, right? Is that same place with the rock garden in the middle and the tree and the skylight? Or am I mixing
No,
places up?
Master Disc was a different building. That was right off of the West Side Highway for like 54th, around there. And True Tone, we were at 44th between 8th and 9th.
Yeah.
Wasn't True Tone was a great studio.
It was a great studio. It was John Stork designed
Yeah.
rooms. It was beautiful rooms, and it now is Sony mastering.
Oh.
But prior to it being True Tone, what was it?
I don't-
Didn't
I
John
th- I
Lennon
th-
do some stuff in there?
I honestly don't know.
I think so.
I'll say yeah, but I don't know.
Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just talking about the question about client base. So I think I've had some of the same clients for over 20 years.
Mhm.
I didn't even know they were clients 20 years ago. They were just like people that I met, at a club, or somebody that I met who was, maybe affiliated with a band that I was friendly with. And I had a studio in my apartment, and they needed to have something mixed, or they wanted to record a vocal or something. They would just come to my apartment, and, I was charging them. And that's kind of how it started with my independent clients, you do have to take anything, take on anything that anybody will ask. If anyone wants any type of work done, take it on, and it might not be the right fit. They might know somebody that's a better fit, So when you get a little older and a little more busy, you can kind of weed through the, people you don't want to work for maybe. But at first, you just kind of take everybody on and see where it goes from there, and follow up too. Even people that you talk about working with and maybe you don't work with, follow up with them in a month or two. Say, hey, did you ever do that record you were talking about? So keep it personal, and that's my advice.
Do you guys feel, because what I was going to say is similar, can you trace your whole career back to that handful of people in the beginning, and it's sort of a web that just grows? Sometimes I'm just chilling out thinking about how lucky that I met, I was working at 251 West 30th in the old music building at a dumpy rehearsal studio that had a 24-track room, but some pretty good gear. And I met an R&B client who brought me down to a place called Campo, where we had this overnight cheap rate. And that led to the next decade of my life working in that studio until I worked for them. And it's I can trace so much all back to that handful of people that you're meeting now. Someone that's in the room tonight might have said something that triggered you or becomes a client in a year, and then suddenly 40 years from now you're going to look back and go, wow, it all went from that couple of people. I love that.
Agreed. Any other questions that we had? Yes.
So yeah, my question is, since all of you worked initially in some other places, and now at least two of you guys have your own home studio setups, do you ever feel tired of working and living in the same place, and how do you manage it? Do you ever feel okay, I just can't be here anymore because I just wake up and then just go down to I don't know, basement work, and then I go back to sleep. So how do you manage that?
Well, for me, after about a month of working at home, I realized, you know what, I got to go out every morning and just go to the coffee shop. I have coffee at home, but I go to the coffee shop on purpose because it just reminds me that there's a bigger world, and it really helps me a lot. I see a couple people, I say, hey, you just get out of your own little head. And then also I come in like tonight and I drive into the city and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't miss this. I love the city, and I do miss the city, but I don't miss looking for a place to park.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's a challenge because there's so much energy in New York or any major city, and when you're in it every day, like I was for 25 years, you get out of that. It took a good year. Like it was just, there was nothing wrong. I love where we live. I love my life, but it really took a while for me to just adjust and to be acclimated into. It's really like a whole new life. I feel like it is a challenge.
Yeah, I was going to say COVID changed the game. I always give the analogy, and some of you guys might not have been born yet, but the tsunami in Japan decimated a tape factory. So it sort of forced the post community to go digital sooner than it had planned. Like everything changed. That was like one of those moments, and COVID has done the same. And for me, working at a company where maybe you're like, there's people around all the time and you can't just be yourself or be boisterous on the phone or do your thing because like you're surrounded by people. When left to my own devices at home, I found that I could get a lot more done, and did, and grew, and kind of got a renewed sense of my own worth in terms of what I do, which, maybe had COVID not happened, I might not have had that. But to work from home and realize, well, the client doesn't need this till tomorrow morning, and there's no point in spending the sunniest, beautiful hours of the day in my basement when I can do it tonight and go for a walk around the lake or go for a hike or go for a bike ride, get air in my lungs and be healthier, have skin color for the first time in decades, and then just after dinner go down and do the work I had to do and stay up as late as I need to because I don't have to be on a train in the morning. So I love it. I think the only person that doesn't love it is my wife, who would much rather I go into the city a lot more often. And unlike these guys, I do have that luxury. I can be at home going, I'm going to go in. I have digital arts to go to. I'm going to go knock around the Atmos room and do some fiddling and be there because the guy who pays me probably likes to see my face a little to know that I exist. So that's a luxury, and today was one of those days. We were doing this tonight. I came in, went to the studio for a few hours. I'm here, back tomorrow morning, and then I'll be working from home. I love the work from home thing.
If I can add one thing, is one of the challenges, and my wife and I both work from home now, is we're working more. We're working longer hours because we can, and that's a challenge too, to shut it off. Because I can't, if I look at my email, okay, I did a record today, everything's great, Joe, can you 11 seems a little bright, or can you switch 6 and 7? Like before, I wouldn't even think about it. I'll do it tomorrow when I get to work.
Yeah.
But I'm at home, like, maybe I'll just go take care of that now. And that's, for me, again, you got to know yourself too. For me, it's not good. I gotta find the cutoff point. Once I get upstairs, I'm not going back downstairs. I'm not checking my email. I'm not going downstairs unless I really, really, really have to. So yeah, that's compartmentalizing was tough.
And I feel like clients have sort of also done that, where it's not unusual for me to get an email at 9 p.m. Hey, the spot's approved. Can you slate it and deliver it? We need it for the morning. And I'm like, it's just downstairs. It's not
Your world is harder.
It's
It's much more demanding.
It's weirder.
Yeah, advertising is so much more demanding. I worked for Lee Shapiro Music.
Oh, sure, yeah.
For about a year, And I was so shocked because at 9 a.m. a company like Bozell, I don't know if they're still, are they still
They're gone,
around?
but I love them. They were a great client.
They would call at like 9 o'clock in the morning and say, we need a Pontiac commercial. Yep, I'd go home. It would be on television that night. Like Lee would write the whole commercial,
Yeah.
hire everybody, get them to the studio, make the commercial. I was just like, it's
Yeah,
so
it's a different world.
stressful.
And I also think part of what led to me having to shut down, you just triggered that, is what producers do within the agencies has shifted. So whereas it used to be a producer would call you, they knew your rates, they would tell you how many hours they need, and it would be a week ahead of time, and you knew what your week looked like. Now it's the 9 o'clock in the morning phone call, like I forgot to book it, and when you're a small shop like I was, I didn't have other rooms to put them in last minute, so you'd get a lot of, oh, can you send your elements over to this studio because we have to do this now, and I was losing business because I wasn't big enough. So that was one of those factors too. But yeah, it's demanding, and setting boundaries is good. I think I've gotten much better. Working within the voice actor sector, I get Facebook messages, LinkedIn messages, emails, text through my website. I just have a quick question. And I finally realized, like, the few minutes I take to answer every question is hours of my day I'll never get back. So now I have this polite little copy and paste letter saying, hi, seems like you need a little help. I would recommend clicking here and book an appointment, and we can talk through your troubles. Because I can't be at the beck and call of every actor from coast to coast all the time. I just have to know my limit.
I would add to that, the reason I decided to open my own room is because once Campo closed, I was freelancing, but we took our second bedroom and turned it into a little mixed room de facto. And that whole thing of not having a delineation between work and home life was really starting to become a problem. Because again, I still have people calling me at 12:30 at night like, hey, I love the mix, but you know what? On the choruses, could you ... And I'm like, I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Do you have a separate phone for your?
I just
For
use
the
my
studio?
cell phone. I just use a cell
See,
phone.
nobody has my cell number.
Oh, well, there you go.
There's like 12 people in the world. Like, not because I'm famous or anything, but
I
Well,
just
this was-
tweeted
I
it
just
out.
like
10 years
I don't
ago.
give out my number.
This was 10 years ago, obviously, but that was one of the reasons because, you know, I was also having people come to my house, and at
Yeah.
some point my husband was like, this has to stop. Because, you know, it's unfair to him because he doesn't have home time. You know, I don't have
unfair to
home
you.
time, that's my choice because I was working from home, but I found that once people knew I had a place, they knew, oh, she's probably there until whatever hour, you know, but 11 o'clock, no, I'm not doing a rough mix of that song that we did today. No, I'm not going to do a revision. So my answer is usually, hey, totally happy to do that. I'll get it to you tomorrow. Period.
fair.
Done. And then I'm back to Star Wars. You know what I mean? So in that regard, I found it difficult to be working from home, and I've thought about it of going back to that model and, you know, finding a home or finding a live-work situation somewhere in the city. But I just thought to myself, like, oh no, then I'm going right back to that because I don't know when to stop. We're all kind of compulsive in the sense that we love what we do.
People
Right.
pleasers too, right?
We're
You
people
wanna get them
pleasers.
happy, yeah.
You want to get everything done. You want to do everything perfect. Having those attributes in your personality is problematic when you work at home, you know. Like now, I actually have 2 forced days off, you know, so that no, you're not doing anything. Thursday is one of them. Hello.
But think about like back in like when I was coming up, I started at a place called the Music Palace in West Hempstead, and I would hover over a Neve at 2 a.m, manually doing recall notes in case they had to do anything. And now you just double click a thing and your session's open. So it's not like it's, you know, it's not work to open it and make an adjustment and spit it out.
Right.
You
So
know.
much easier.
Still time.
Time, yeah.
Yeah, like,
But not what
you
it
know,
used to be.
hey, can you put the vocal? I love the mix. I just feel like the vocal needs to be just a touch louder, and you're like, done.
Yeah, here you go.
Print, send, done. Like 15 minutes of my day. But yeah, I mean, I think all of these are good things to think about if you're looking into entrepreneurship. But also understanding that there is a work-live balance that still needs to be maintained in some way. Like, I know for myself, I have 4 months where I don't see daylight. Usually every year, 4 or 5 months, I'm just the whole time. But I don't mind that for a short period of time. It's when it becomes 7 months, 8 months, a year where you don't have any daylight between work and live, that becomes problematic because your relationships suffer. And if you have kids, your kids suffer. You know, you have to find some way. And I remembered the question that I was going to ask.
See, you knew it would happen.
So, last one. Production expert, I don't know if any of you are subscribed to this e-zine, but they just had an article. I don't know if you saw this. I think it was yesterday or today. They were talking about, you know, the downfall of being studio, you know, engineers and the health issues from being a studio engineer, because you're sitting all day, number one. You're usually locked into a space. You're not really seeing daylight, all the things that we treasure. And then your relationships suffer as well. And a lot of times you're working alone. Like, I don't know about you guys. I mean, you have a manager, but you work at a bigger studio. But it's like, I have to force myself to actually go out and see people. And I've been doing it more and more because COVID was even more isolating. How have you found ways to keep yourself physically healthy, but more importantly,
You're asking
mentally?
the wrong person.
Well, hello. Wide load over here. So how do you keep yourself mentally healthy? Because you have long stretches of time where you're just out of your mind because you're trying to do all these projects all at once. Because for me, anyway, everybody comes at once. It's like, it's not a 40-hour week. No, it's a 100-hour week and a 20-hour week, 80-hour week, 40-hour week. It changes all the time. How do you maintain your relationships with your significant others and kids and still have a healthy mental state and physical state? Is that something that you have to think about?
I have to think about it. I cook for my family every night, so I go home at 5 o'clock.
Oh.
I cook dinner, and then usually I'm back at the studio at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, pretty much every night. So I have that little 4 or 5 hour window every day where I see my son, I see my wife, and if there's nothing that's happening in the studio at night, then I can stay home till 10 o'clock at night, and then go to the studio at 11. You know, but I'm pretty much there every night. As far as being mentally healthy and you know, I think it's, you know, you don't want to work on projects that you don't want to be working on. That's really not healthy. So you got to kind of find a way to not get, you know, bogged down with something. If you don't want to be in a room with somebody, you know, doing that for weeks at a time, that'll definitely cause issues. Other than that, you just got to get out there. You got to take walks, you know, get your blood flow going. Because yeah, it's a lot of sitting, and a lot of staring at the screen. So, you know, you have to keep that in mind, you know. Try to eat healthy. Try not to, you know, to eat crap every day. Try to eat healthy, you know, that'll, you know, level you out a little. So that's my advice.
Joe?
Well, one of the reasons I became a mastering engineer is because when I was starting off working as an assistant in engineering, you would do these crazy long hours. I hated it. I knew that was not a lifestyle that I was going to be happy with. And with mastering, I was able to more easily keep a defined schedule, which just fit my personality. So now, you know, I'm up 7 every day. I'm in the gym at 7:30, and I work out for at least an hour every day. That's just part of my, how I like to be. I'm in my studio at around 9 a.m. And most days I'm out of my studio at 6 p.m. I have as I mentioned, I have a manager who takes care of all my booking, all my paperwork, all my accounting. That frees up a lot of my time. And I keep a pretty strict schedule because of that. I rarely work on weekends. And, you know, with that, I can do, you know, I'm doing 50, 60 songs a week. and that's enough. You know, I meditate every day. I work out every day. I moved out of the city after a long time to, you know, to also help with that. So yeah, I try to be pretty self-aware of those kind of things.
Plus your commute time.
My commute
mean,
is
your
really
commute has gotta
well,
be,
my
what, 20
dog too.
seconds?
You know, I got a dog. It's so freaking cute. Every day at 7 a.m. I wake up and he's just staring at me. He's the cutest freaking dog, and it's just like he just starts my day, and I just because he's got to go out, and so I have to get up at 7, and you know, so I'm outside. You know, I give him like a 15-minute walk 3 times a day. So
That's excellent. Excellent. So I think we're over our time. Yes.
So my question is, when is the most terrifying moment that happened in your career? Because as Angela student, I heard a lot of like scary, like creepy stories, so that we can avoid like at least pick up like 2 copies or see some machines smoking, just run or something like that. Is there anything that can just, when we face this kind of situation, we should avoid this?
I think the mistakes are going to happen no matter how much you plan for it. For m- yeah, that I mean, it's just, and it's par for the course. And there's all these horror stories. We never know what's true. I know early on I was mixing an R&B tune. We were cutting vocals, and I really needed to use the bathroom. And I said to the assistant, "There are 16 bars of a solo, and then anywhere in there, punch in, let him do the next verse. I'm going to duck out. I'll be right back." And prior to that, there was a really long high note that took forever for this guy to get and hold and do it. And I'm in the bathroom, and I hear that high note going, and right in the middle of it, she punched in. And it was what, I mean, you know, we got back to where we were, but it was one of those horror moments. And then in the digital age, I had done a 60-second commercial for Bozell, and then the producer emailed me and said, the delivery place is saying it's not 60, it's like 54. And I'm like, no, it's 60. And I'm looking at Digital Performer, and I'm looking at it, it's like 0, it's 60, it's 60. Then I took a stopwatch to it and realized we're short. And I realized that I was clocking the wrong speed, the early days of digital. So while I was recording it at 44.1, I was referencing 48, and Digital Performer let me do it, and I spit out a spot that was artificially fast and short. I'm like, oh, no problem. And I just went back in and spaced everything out and filled up the time. So, I mean, we could do horror stories for days, all of us, I'm sure.
I remember an event that happened at a studio when I was an assistant, and it was a post thing. There was a commercial for TV Land being recorded, and the engineer, whose name I won't say, we were recording Tony Randall from The Odd Couple, and he punched over Tony Randall from The Odd Couple saying something on this TV Land spot. And so they had to call Tony Randall to come back down from his house on the Upper West Side to punch in this spot, and he came dressed as Oscar Madison. Came in the whole thing with the hat and he was very upset, and he let us know that he was very upset. But he very professionally went in and, you know, did his punch and left, and that was
You mean Felix Unger?
Felix. He
Oh,
was
right,
Felix.
right,
Okay,
right.
Felix. Yeah, but fully dressed as Felix, the hat, the briefcase, and everything, and was not happy about that. So with nonlinear now, we don't really have to worry too much about
Yeah.
punching over things.
Undo.
But yeah.
That's,
Applesy.
I have another one I just have to share because it popped into my head. That same assistant, who is obviously no longer in the business, we were doing a mix one night. It was like 3 in the morning, and it was back in I had a console going in 2 2-inch decks, and I was flying in vocal samples virtually locked to Performer. We had a lot going on, and a fuse blew during the night, and it set us back a bit. And a buddy of mine knew how to do these things, so we went into the stairwell, pulled the fuse box down, stole a fuse from another floor we knew there was nobody on, got us back up and running. The owner comes in 7:30 in the morning. We're still finishing the mix. We explain that we had downtime because of the fuse thing. So he says to this person, "Show me what happened." And as we're printing the mix, she goes to the stairwell and says, "And then we just pulled this down," and she shut us down, like mid-print, shut the room down. I just remembered that. That's great.
Wow.
Any from Joe?
I don't really have too many horror stories. The two horror stories that I think of are really more things that happened to the studio. Once when I was in Dumbo, we had the big hurricane, and I was just looking out the window. I could see the Brooklyn Bridge from where I was, and I'm looking at the merry-go-round, or what is that? There's a really beautiful glass building with it, and I'm watching, and I'm just thinking, man, I don't know what's going to happen. This is getting really bad. And then all of a sudden, just water just started pouring into my back room. Luckily, it didn't hit the actual mastering room, but it was just pouring in there.
Wow.
And this is how horrible the building was. When I called the people who own the building, I said, somebody's got to get down here. There's just literally water just pouring into my studio. And the woman who managed the building said, well, that's why you have insurance. That was her answer.
Wow.
I was like, and then when I built my new studio, in my current studio in my house, I'm in the room for maybe a month. And a month later, then we're having the kitchen redone. And they didn't turn the water off. My studio's brand new. I just spent like a lot of money. And I'm sitting there, and my dog, Hendrix, he's there, and I see him licking the floor. So I thought I spilled something. And then I realized the water's coming through the ceiling. And again, it's like, here's my console, and the water's dripping right here.
Oh, man.
So again, I was so lucky because it didn't hit any gear, but we had to open the ceiling, let it dry out, close it back up. So it cost me a couple of days, and it's just like, those nightmares are worse than any clients I've ever had.
Denise, any from your experience you want to share with us?
You reminded me of a situation that I've blocked out, which was we were in the middle of a tracking session in Mona Lisa 2 on the Upper West Side. We were in the basement of a residential building, and above us was a moving company. So there was nobody around us. It was perfect. Outside of the fact that the bathroom was underneath street level. So we had this huge rainstorm, the session's happening, and the guitar player had to use the bathroom, and he comes in to the control room and says, Denise, there's like a waterfall coming out of your bathroom. And I'm like, oh, come on, because he was also one of these types of people that was just jokester. I'm like, oh, come on, really? A waterfall? And he goes, no, really, you need to really check this out. And my assistant, I see him walking really fast and stopping with this face like this. I'm like, what's going on? We have a water situation. And I'm like, okay. So I go back there, and literally there's a waterfall, like a sheet of water coming down through the bathroom. So it was the bathroom that was under street level, and then we had a little lounge, and then you had to step up to get to the live room. Thank God for that step up, because the water was already starting to rise. So he's like, do we have paper towels? I'm like, really, how many paper towels are gonna fix this?
All the
Like,
paper
what are we gonna do?
Paper towel.
So we open up the bathroom door there were, you know, those trap doors for the street, and the water was literally running through there too. So there was this big, long puddle going, and that was terrifying. So I've blocked that out up until your story. Thanks for reminding me.
You're welcome.
But we're not there anymore, so it doesn't matter. And the reason we're not there is because they sold the building, and we found out that we were actually illegal, that it was only supposed to be used for storage and not for an office, where we were told that it was supposed to be for storage and office. So yeah, we had to leave. But it was a much better situation now.
All right, this has been going great, and we're running a little late, so we'll be finishing up soon. We do have one question from Facebook. We'll keep it short.
Okay.
Basically, the person was asking, his name is Sam Stauff. Sam Stauff was asking, when you guys were doing your build-outs, if you experimented with where the speakers went. I'm asking this on his behalf, and I'm going to modify it a little bit. I don't know if you have large or near field or midfields, Did you guys soffit your speakers, or are they on stands? Tell us just a short version, a little bit about your what you did to place your speakers. Let's stick it with the stereo part of it, because Atmos can get a little complicated.
I mean, for me at home, when I started, I had stereo and I had RLX pads under them to kind of decouple them from my workstation. But early in the pandemic, I just didn't like crouching down, so I put them on risers that are, buffered, but nothing crazy for me. I've got stands in the front and back for my surround, but there's no softening on my end. It's all relatively near
The
field.
stands sit on the floor or on rug?
On the rug, actually. Yeah.
Interesting. How about you guys, Rich, Joe?
I know Sam. Hi, Sam. How you doing? So when my room was designed, it's completely symmetrical. So I went in there with speaker stands, and the rule that I was kind of told many years ago was keep your monitors 3 feet away from every surface. So I kind of did some measurements. I put the stands symmetrically from the walls, measured, made sure they were 3 feet away from all the boundaries. I put the speakers on the stands, played some music. It sounded great. The room already sounded good. It was treated. It was, kind of ready to move into. Since then, I have gotten new monitors, and I've experimented with, a little further back from the wall. As far away from the wall or any surface just seems to give you, truer sound. I don't have any soffits in the walls, so I have barefoot monitors on stands, and they're very accurate. Works great.
I have CAF reference monitors. They're floor standing. They're front ported, so that tells you right away that if you have a front port on your speaker, that you do not want to have it on the stand. That port is designed to be. It is designed with the floor in mind. And I've had them. Yeah, I've had them for a while, and I think it's basically an 8-foot triangle. The speakers are 8 foot apart. I'm 8 foot from those speakers. And I love them. Yeah, they sound good.
Those are KEF?
CAF, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for both of you, is it on rug or on hardwood floor?
My stands are like on the hardwood floor.
And Joe?
My speakers are on rollers because they're big and heavy, but they're on the wood floor.
Nice. Denise, how about you?
No soffits, just one pair on stands and one pair on my desk.
And when you moved into Mona Lisa, the current rendition, would you experiment with where they went, or you had a vision with your design plan of where they were going to be?
I mean, when we first started, I was just happy to hear something. God. Because it was such a nightmare. But I've experimented a bit, and where they are right now, I have my near fields, my NS10s right in front of me, probably about this far. And then we have a set of equators, and those are on stands, but they're still small speakers. And those are, I would say, about 8 feet back, and they're placed a little bit wider.
They have a very good bass response, so it's nice to have a little distance with
They're
them, right?
really beautiful, yeah. They're, the only thing I don't like about them is they have this weird little resonance, like around 4K, that makes my teeth itch. But otherwise, that's usually how I know the vocals are wrong. Like if the vocals are too bright, and we do a lot of musical theater, if they have that little bite, I always put them on those speakers to check it, and if they sound a little hollow or if they have a little bite to them, I know I still have to fix them. But the NS10s are generally what I mix on, just because I trust them. And the old adage, if you can make anything sound good on NS10s,
Right.
they'll correlate anywhere, and it's kind of true, outside of the fact that it makes you tired.
Right. A lot of high end to contend with throughout the day.
No tissue paper for me on the tweeters.
So I'll add in just a little advice about the question about mistakes that Jace asked us. A very sort of well-known engineer with 3 initials that starts with a C. I used to assist him many decades ago, and I don't remember exactly what happened. I do kind of, but it was his fault. But anyway, he said to me, Roey, when you make a mistake, it's actually not a bad thing, as long as you don't make it again, because then you learn nothing. So that was an important gem he shared with me when I was a Ute, a 19-year-old Ute in the studio. So, okay, we will be closing up our Facebook in a moment and doing our raffle for our packed house here. I want to thank our panelists. That was wonderful and very insightful. Me being also a studio owner, I will say in the past, one different methodology I used, and even when we were trying to expand and didn't actually expand, I always looked for existing facilities. Because if you were lucky, it was a decently built facility, and it puts you way ahead of the curve in terms of what your expenditure would have to be to get started. So I thought that's another thing to look out for. Tried to do that at Chungking when he closed. Unfortunately, he took a sledgehammer to every piece of glass, so it was just impractical to go ahead and take over that space. But Area 51 is currently in Jersey City. It's not a commercial studio, it's my private lab, so Joe and I will have to have lunch soon in Jersey City at this awesome Italian seminary. It's actually Escalaro, it's over on West Side. I'll show you, it's amazing. Best buffalo mozzarella. All right, so thank you everybody for joining us today here in the room and on Facebook. Our next event currently is scheduled for December. I believe it's the 13th. We may have one more before then with a great acoustician, but we'll wait until we finalize it to announce it. So thanks again, everybody, for coming out. On behalf of the AES New York section, I want to thank NYU for providing us with the space, and also Eventide for giving us our split EQ that we'll be raffling shortly. Okay, thanks, everybody. And
Thank you. Thanks, Denise.
thank you so much
Thank
for
you guys.
giving us your insight and knowledge.